Okay, let's continue to the second session of this morning. And the second session is more or less devoted to musicology, to music documents. At first, we have Julia Ackermann. She studied musicology, cultural management, and German literature at the Franz Liszt University of Music in Weimar, the Friedrich Schiller University in Vienna, and the Université Paris-Sorbonne. From 2014 to 2018, she was a researcher in a project led by Professor Dr. Martin Eibel. Unfortunately, he couldn't come because of the problems with the trains, at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna. As part of this project, she wrote her dissertation entitled, I have only the German things here, I cannot translate it, Zwischen Vorstadtbühne, Hoftheater und Nationalsingspiel, the Opera Comique in Vienna, 1768 to 1783, and she got the doctorate with distinction. And also a very special prize, the Franz Stephan Prize by the Austrian Society for the Research of the 18th Century. Since May 2021, she is research assistant in the research project Paper and Copyists in Viennese opera scores 1760 to 1770. And she will speak about this project.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emanuel, for this kind introduction and for the invitation to this conference. I'm very happy that we're here in this beautiful place, surrounded by watermarks. What can there be a better place to talk about them here? Yes, I'm very pleased to present our project Paper and Copyists in Viennese opera scores 1760 to 74 to you as experts of watermark and paper research. The project is located at the University of Music and Performing Arts Vienna and funded by the Austrian Science Fund. Chair of the project is Professor Dr. Martin Eibel, and as one of 4 project members, I have the honor to represent my team here today. As a musicologist, for a long time I was only interested in the music written on the paper. It was only in 2014, with the beginning of our first project phase, that I realized how helpful watermarks and the handwriting of copyists can be for dating music manuscripts. Since 2021, we are in the second and much more intensive work phase of this project, and we have developed a database of paper and copyists in Viennese opera scores with the immense help of Emanuel Winger. And thanks to him, our watermarks were included in the Bernstein catalog from the beginning, so the structure of the database could be designed accordingly. The link we have here in the middle will lead you to this, to our homepage and the database, but I must point out that this is the beta version that we have online, and it is regularly supplemented and improved, and we're always grateful for your feedback if you want to browse through our website. Most of the works by Haydn, Gluck, and other Viennese composers of the 18th century normally remained undated. The aim of our research project is to help scholars date these musical manuscripts. The database combines information on opera scores, paper or watermark, and copyists. Rather than single elements, the combination of these features is the most valuable clue to dating. The project exhibits various types of combinations, for example, those of copyists working together, or those of paper types used simultaneously. This creates a network of information that is resilient enough to base further dating questions on. We examine a corpus of around 150 opera scores, which is about 300 volumes, from the Imperial Collection, which is today part of the music collection of the Austrian National Library. The collection includes most of the operas performed between 1760 and 74 in Vienna. As the manuscripts were likely to be copied close to the performance of the work in Vienna, and in most of the cases we know the date of this performance, with some caution and use of additional sources, the score can also be dated accordingly. The chosen time period is characterized by multiple performances of Italian and French opera in Vienna, and by the fact that the Viennese court collected scores of these works. We thus have a close temporal sequence of the sources, which makes this period a perfect field for such an examination. The function of the scores is not totally clear. However, it is likely that in most cases, it is not the performance material from which the music was actually played or conducted in the opera house, but that the scores probably served more of a collector's function for the imperial family. They have therefore all been made by professional scribes in a planned layout. They often show little signs of use and sometimes have magnificent bindings of leather, silk, or, as you can see here, brocade paper. We examine each score page by page, recording in detail how the choirs are arranged, the rastrology, which is the number of staves and the total span, which paper and which watermarks were used, and which copyists wrote on it. All of this data is regularly entered into our database, allowing for various queries. You can find the lists of the studied scores on our homepage sorted by different parameters and also with the dating. And if the dating of the score is not identical with the date of the first performance in Vienna, there are short comments on that. I wanted to show you around a bit on our homepage, but as we don't have internet here, you just have to do that later at home. And I can tell you that, we take a so-called score sheet to each score we study with all these parameters, and that helps us to find out how the score was produced, how the copyists worked together, for example, whether each area was written by another copyist, or if one copyist wrote the whole volume, and if there were mixed papers, so they took one different paper for each area, or if they planned the whole volume with only one paper. But let us now turn to the paper and watermarks, which are of particular interest at this conference. What is important about our project is that we do not consider the individual watermark in isolation, but we always reconstruct the complete paper sheet. That is possible because all the scores in our collection have the same quarto oblong format. We define a paper as a combination of 2 or 3 watermarks appearing in a particular arrangement. So a paper sheet shows, in most of the cases, a mark on the left side and a countermark on the right side, and sometimes we find an additional side mark. A paper sheet consisting of 4 quadrants normally was cut lengthwise first, then folded crosswise, where it was bound later on. So the watermarks are often played in the middle of each half sheet, just where it was cut. So when we go through the scores, we always see the halves of the watermarks on the upper edge of each folio. By combining photographs of the 4 associated quadrants and reconstructing the whole sheet, the mark and the countermark become almost completely visible again. And as far as available and identifiable, both twins of each paper are presented in the database. Is that visible on the screens, the watermarks? Okay. So as you know, in the paper production, they used the 2 molds alternately, producing a set of twin sheets that we label here with A and B. Can zoom in here a little bit so that you can see the difference between P65A and B in the star and in the tail of the star. Thus, when we evaluate a score and have identified a new paper in it, we must first find out which half sheets of the two twins belong together. In the simplest case, a quire of 8 folios would show the A twin on folio 1, 2, 7, and 8, and the B twin on folios 3, 4, 5, 6. But unfortunately, the composition of the quires is not always so regular, and the respective halves of the sheets do not always lie directly next to each other, so that we must go through the entire volume, measuring the selenometry and the distances of the chain lines on the search for the 4 quadrants of a sheet that belong together. Once we have detected the new paper in one of our scores and theoretically reconstructed the whole paper sheet and its twin, we start the process of making images of the watermarks and adding them to our database. We produce the watermark images by using transmitted light and image subtraction. The photo department of the Austrian National Library takes 2 digital photos of a single page, one lit from the side of the camera, which you can see on the left side, and the other one from behind the page on the right. So the right one is the one that you might know from putting the light pad under the paper, where you can faintly see the watermark. And afterwards, the one image is digitally subtracted from the other with MATLAB in a way that the writing on the front side of the paper disappears. The writing on the back side turns white, faintly visible, but not interfering with the watermark, which appears dark already. And the subsequent rescaling of the gray shades and contrast amplification makes it exactly visible in its form, as you can see on the right. And finally, the individual post-processed photos of the 4 quadrants, as I said, are merged into one large image that shows the entire paper sheet. It's the first time in musicology that watermarks are made visible by image subtraction in such an extensive project. We are very satisfied with this method because it does not require expensive technical equipment like the radiography or thermography. So with nothing but professional photographic equipment and a digital post-processing via MATLAB and Photoshop, we obtain very good high-resolution images that are much more accurate than the manually traced sketches of the watermarks as previously used in musicology. So far, we have been able to identify, photograph, and feed into the database about 70 different papers. So as I said, they are all consisting of 2 to 3 watermarks and each represented with the 2 twin sheets. So if you multiply this in, for example, the Bernstein catalog, which registers the single watermarks, we have at the moment 280 watermarks published there. And new papers are, of course, being added continuously. Using the initials of the paper makers, we were able to determine, with the help of the Matozzi catalog mainly, that the paper used in our inventory came mostly from paper mills in Toscolano. The paper was transported to Vienna via Venice and Trieste and processed in the local copyist workshops with a relatively quick turnaround. So let's assume we have an undated music manuscript, like this one, and we want to find out, this is a facsimile, of course, and we want to find out in what time it was written with the help of our database. So as you are probably all used to, we put this paper on our light pad and see if we can see the motif of the watermark. Yes, we can see it in this case. Let's say it is 3 crescents, the letters F, A, C, and a lily. So this motif is quickly found on our website, where you can open the image in a high resolution and can even download it. Also, we add additional information about this paper. For example, the measurements of the selenometry of the crescents. And also the date, because as I said before, since the scores we are examining can each be dated, the papers can also be dated based on the scores, which means we can trace quite precisely in which period and for how long a paper was used. And also we have for each paper, I wanted to show you that online, but yeah. For each paper, we have this overview page with the images, the date, the selenimetry, and so on, the paper mill. And also this overview of each paper brings the three aspects of interest, so the scores, the paper, and the copyists together. So you can always see which copyists used this paper and which scores contain this paper. And so when you found this image of watermarks on our website, you can download it, as I said, and to compare the shape of the watermark as accurately as possible, we recommend to print out the watermark images true to scale on transparent paper, that's important, and put these prints directly on the paper source you want to compare it with. I don't know if you're all used to do this. If not, I can pass this through, and you can have a look at this, because I wanted to show it to you on the homepage, and now we can use it, the prints. So if you check this, you found the motif on the database, you check the selenimetry, you printed out the watermark on this transparent paper and put it on your source, and the watermark is identical, then it's great, and you can go to the next step, which we will do later. If it's not identical, you can maybe look for another paper and find a similar motif in our database. But there are some cases when you're not so sure if it's identical. For example, the crescents are identical, the initials themselves too, but not the position of the letters to each other. So maybe it's a variant. This brings me to the point of the different variants of papers, which are also included in the database. When there are only slight deviations in the watermarks, it is sufficient to only describe them. But if the deviations are more extensive and consistent enough to occur in several quires or scores, we also take photos of them and address them as variant 1 to 3, etc., of the related watermark. For example, here on paper 71, you can see how the letter S moves to the right, and the variant 3 also dissolves slowly. But the other parts of the watermark of the sheet, for example, the crescents always stay consistent, and the wires of the watermark only move in some places. Or another example where these variants really allow fascinating insight into the works of the paper makers. For example, when a loose wire was replaced, as here, or an old mesh or mold was reused with a partly different watermark. For example, here in P79, they must have reused the mold. Maybe they lost the letter S of the first of the P79, and then they replaced an S, but on the other side of the A, which you can see in P89, so it's a different S and placed on the other side of the S, so that makes the whole sheet mirrored. But the crescents, they stayed exactly the same and are identical in both papers. Finally, I would like to take a brief look at the third major aspect that we are covering in our project, the copyists. As mentioned at the beginning, we document for each score which copyists wrote on which folios. We give each individual handwriting a seal, and if we encounter the scribe again in a later manuscript, it is assigned to this seal. In this way, we have already been able to identify from a total of 80 different scribes some particularly productive main copyists of this period between 1760 and 74, and gained valuable information about the cooperation of copyist teams. We can even identify some copyists by name, for example, based on entries in account books, such as the heads of relevant workshops. This, for example, is the handwriting of Theresia Ziss, who ran her own extremely productive copyist workshop from about 1755 to the mid-1770s. She had a steady team of about 6 further copyists around her, and we can observe in many scores how she starts with the first choirs or the first musical numbers, and then hands over the score to one or more of her collaborators. Coming back to our previous example of the identification of this paper. So we already identified the paper P22, which is dated to 1763 to 65. And to confirm or even narrow this dating, we now also want to identify the copyists who wrote the musical notes. We can do so by using a special, newly developed tool on our homepage, the Copyist Identifier. With its graphical user interface, copyists can be identified by their individual characteristics. So on the homepage, I can choose the characteristic clefs and final bar lines of the copyist. And first, I receive a list of all copyists recorded in the database who write their keys and final bar lines in this manner. And from this list, I can choose the one I have here on my manuscript and compare it. If it's really identical, we also have more different we have all the characteristics, so I can click on this copyist, and I can not only see the clefs and the final bar lines, but also each note and each break and all the musical signs, and really compare in detail how he or she wrote. And then in the list of the copyists, I can, these are the details, so to really compare all the musical signs, and also a bit of the handwriting. And then we have also the dates in which these copyists were active. So in the case I wanted to identify here, we see that this copyist was active 1760 to 64. And if I combine this with the paper I found, which is dated to 63 to 65, I can narrow the dating of my manuscript to 1763 to 64. So with this particular example, I wanted to show how helpful especially the combination of information on watermarks and copyists can be in the dating of musical sources. I hope I was able to give you a practical insight into our working process, so the working process in our research project and the possible applications of our database, and I will look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you.